Welcome to Real Life Beyond Faith, where a formerly Christian, currently atheist couple takes a deep dive into the experience of life after deconversion. This is episode 2. I'm your host, Jenica Crail.
And I am Patrick Crail.
So today we're going to do something a little bit different than last time. We're going to focus entirely on Patrick's story, his background, his Christian upbringing, and kind of dig in deeper with that. But first, we want to thank our patrons. These are patrons that pledged to us before we even published a single episode. We appreciate these guys so much. That's Jeff Prebig, Justin Krebs, Chris Watson, Nathan Dickey, Thomas Santo, Rich Kemp, and Mark Ramsey. Thanks. We really, really appreciate your support and encouragement in getting started. It's so huge to us. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Patrick, do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you were raised, a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I grew up in a conservative Christian home. It was the kind where we went to church every Sunday, Wednesday, sometimes Saturday night. We were involved in helping at church. There was the tech team, setting up the stage every week, tearing stuff down. Before I get too far into that, this is just a general overview, but I'm going to go back to the beginning and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
So at the beginning, my first, I guess, memory of how I became a Christian was back when I was in, it was either kindergarten or first grade. I was pretty young. My parents took us to a Christian play that was playing on Halloween. Was
it one of those like Judgement houses, or was it just like a normal play and not scary?
No, it was not scary.
Oh, okay. I've been to one of those Judgement houses. Have you been?
No, I have not.
Oh my gosh, it's so ridiculous. We'll have to talk about that one of these days.
So we went there instead of trick-or-treating because...
it's up the devil.
Right. But, I don't remember what the play was about because it was a long time ago. But I do remember at the end of the play, they had an altar call, and I went up to the front to accept Jesus as my savior.
What prompted you to do that? Do you remember?
I think it was partially my family and partially wanting to feel like I'm part of the group. Like a bunch of other kids were going up there.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're probably thinking, oh, I haven't done this yet. I should probably do this and make sure my soul is safe.
Right.
I think that's what a lot of kids do in those situations.
And, it seems totally normal when you're a kid.
Right. Especially growing up in that kind of environment.
Right. It's just what you do.
Yeah.
So I went up front and did the thing. Obviously, not a whole lot changed right away.
Well, how old were you?
Kindergarten, first grade-ish.
Okay. So what, like
5 or 6?
6. Gosh, that's so young.
Yeah. So, there was a lot that I didn't understand at that point, but
when did it become real to you?
That's a good question. I would say maybe 7 or 8-ish, I would say, because I was getting involved in like the kid stuff at church, and I was all about it. There was... On Sunday mornings, they would have, church for the adults, and then they would also have the kids' rooms. So I would always go to the kids' rooms and be a part of that.
Right.
In the church camps, summer camps, it was a week out of the summer.
Cool. So how seriously did you take your faith, like as you entered your teen years and stuff? Obviously the teen years bring some distractions, and a lot of people kind of dip out of church activities during that time. Was that you, or were you pretty serious about it?
I was all about it. I mean, all right, so we went to youth group, and I was there pretty much every week. Some of my friends I know, they would look for like an excuse to not go.
Yeah.
But
I had friends like that too.
Yeah. But I always wanted to go. I enjoyed hanging out with my friends and doing all the things.
You know, I did too. And that's one of the things that I wonder if there is a good replacement for that in our secular community. You know what I mean?
Right.
I loved being in youth group and getting to go and do activities and, you know, do stuff in the community and just like, you know, concerts, just everything. Like we always had something going on and it was a blast. Like I love my youth group experience, but I don't know if there's anything really like that for our secular youth. Maybe we'll have to make sure there is something by the time our kids get to that age.
Right.
So tell me about your teenage years then.
So, you know, I would always go to the youth group, but I think I was around 13. We went to this thing called the Silver Ring thing.
Ah, yes.
The purity event.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, once you become a teenager, you go to this event and they talk to you about abstinence and saving yourself for your lifelong partner. Well, going into it, you know, I'm a teenager. I'm thinking, you know, this is going to be hard. Like, I don't know if I want to do this, but you know, after hearing the whole thing and like the weeks and months following, I embraced it. And
did you embrace it like at the event? Were you like sold based on what they were saying? Or?
No, not quite. Okay. Not at the event. I mean, it started planting the seeds, and you know, as the weeks and months came on, I thought about it some more.
So you thought about it some more?
Yeah, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was a cool idea, and I went with it. I didn't always wear the ring because I didn't like it, but I still embraced the purity culture.
Yeah, and the idea of like saving yourself for marriage.
Yeah. It took a little while because, you know, I was a teenager and I was kind of resistant to it at first, but ended up embracing it.
Yeah. What about that like drew you to the idea? Was it the fear of letting God down, or was it more, you know, the gift of giving your virginity to your wife?
I think it was both. A little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I think probably both for me too. 'Cause like I wanted to please God and I wanted my marriage to be something like beautiful, something I could be proud of. But then there was also the aspect of, you know, I wanted to be able to offer this beautiful, righteous gift to the man I married. Like, here I am, like perfect and flawless. Yeah, that didn't work out so well, but you know, that's for another show.
Yeah.
Another episode. So you went to the silver ring thing, got serious about purity.
It was also kind of around the same time. I think I was 13 or 14. When I got baptized, I made a decision to take that step of faith and not baptize myself, but get baptized. So I did that. And, you know, that's the point where like it becomes serious, because like when you're a child, like you grow up believing it, but when you make the decision to get baptized, then it's kind of your declaration of, all right, this is what I'm about. You know, I'm serious about this.
Right. I feel like in the Christian church, like the non-denominational or, you know, contemporary Christian church, baptism is more of a big deal than it seems to be for like Catholics who get confirmed. Like it seems like confirmation isn't, you know, a huge deal for most people. Like you don't even necessarily have to believe, you just like kind of go through the motions. for me, and it sounds like for you, it was a big decision, and it was something that we had to like consciously make, that yes, I want to declare to the world in front of my church,
right,
I am a Christian, I believe in God, and I want to get dunked under the water and come up a brand new human. Like that kind of a deal. Was that true for you?
Yeah. But at the same time, like, just like in David Smalley's book, Baptized Atheist.
Right.
After I was done, like, I, again, didn't feel that different.
Yeah. Were you having doubts at that point, though?
No, I wasn't having doubts.
Okay. Because, like,
so it's not exactly the same.
Yeah. Like, David, he was, like, having, like, major doubts at that point.
Right.
I wasn't. I was about 12, I think, when I was baptized.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really didn't have any doubts when I was real young. Did you?
Yeah, no, I didn't either.
Yeah. We weren't critical thinkers.
I do remember once I was in middle school in science class, when we were learning about evolution.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that kind of brought on some cognitive dissonance, because the church teaches us one thing, and it's not evolution. And then we learn in school, well, some of us.
I was going to say, you learned about evolution in middle school?
Right.
Lucky.
But yeah, the school teaches you something different, and you have to try to either reconcile those or figure out which one you want to believe.
Right. Or like come to some kind of a compromise in your mind, which is what I did.
Yeah. And that's what I did too.
Yeah. I learned in college that we all originate from people in Africa. And I was like, oh, Adam and Eve must have been black. Like, I remember, like, as a college student thinking that in my head, like, oh, that's interesting. They must have been black.
Yeah.
Like, no, dumbass. Your mythology is just wrong.
Yeah.
But it's just too much cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. So I do remember that being a little bit of a struggle, but not enough to make me question everything.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably the earliest of questioning that I had.
Yeah.
As far as religion goes.
All right. So then what are some of the key things that you were taught that stick out to you now?
Taught from church?
Yeah. Like when you look back over your upbringing in Christianity, what really stands out as being like the main things that you took away from your Christianity, like what you believed?
Well, like when I was saying that I got baptized, that was a big part of your faith. Like, it's being baptized is symbolic, but at the same time, like it's almost like you're not truly saved until you are baptized, because you're not making that declaration until that point, I guess.
Yeah, but like the churches we went to, I don't think that was part of the doctrine. Do you think that was just kind of your own understanding of it?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
So there's that. There's the whole don't question the Bible. You have to take it on faith. Things that you're taught in church is true.
Yeah. Do you ever remember sitting in church, listening to the pastor and thinking, that's not true?
Not that I recall.
Me neither.
Yeah.
And
it wasn't until like later on.
Yeah. It wasn't until I actually started like really doubting.
Yeah.
That actually became something that could enter my mind. When I was younger, it was just like, oh, well, the pastor said it and he is being led by God to, give this sermon. So it must be true. And I'll just take his word for it.
Right.
I didn't really question all that much. I questioned a little bit more once I got into my adult years, and like some of the stuff they were saying at that church I was going to, that's kind of like a cult. I was just like, oh, that kind of strikes me as bullshit, especially when they were talking about like Christian rock music. I'm like, are you kidding? These people are worshiping God with their talents and their music, and you're gonna tell me that this is of the devil because they're wearing black and they're wearing like these
or
like
the music's
big boots.
too heavy.
Like, come the fuck on. So even then, I was like, okay, this is bullshit. But that was like really the only thing that I disagreed with, or like didn't just take their word for. And that's because I was heavily invested in Christian rock music.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even really get that. I mean, we went to Creation Fest.
Yeah. I went to a live.
Yeah. It was basically the same thing, just different states.
Christian rock festivals.
Right. So it was like 2 or 3 day festival with all kinds of different Christian bands. You know, some are heavy, some are not, but...
Yeah, I gravitated towards the heavy ones.
Right.
Not gonna lie, like Christian rock music can actually be kind of awesome. Yeah. Like some of it is just like, oh, this is total shit. But I still like some Christian rock bands.
Yeah, I still listen to a bit. We both
listened to a couple, like August Burns Red and
Oh Sleeper.
Oh yeah. Oh Sleeper's actually my favorite band right now.
Mine too. Wolves at the Gate, they're very outspoken Christian. But they are pretty awesome.
And Emery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. Anyway, we digress. So when did you get to the point where you felt comfortable asking the hard questions about your faith and doubting? Or did you ever before we finally decided to dig in?
I never really felt comfortable. Having questions made me nervous. Like I was doing something wrong, or it's not okay to question, because that's what we were always taught. So I was afraid to kind of look into those questions and find out where it led me.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
It's like they were too scary.
Yeah. Like before this all happened, there was a time where you were having some doubts, and I got scared, and I emailed our pastor, and I said, I told him like, hey, my wife is having some questions and some doubts. Can we come meet with you, because we're having a little bit of a crisis?
I almost forgot about that.
Yeah. And, I was trying to be the head of the household,
my spiritual leader.
Right.
Yeah.
So I took it upon myself to, try to help you through it, and, make sure that you didn't go down the wrong path.
But were you also just kind of like freaking out in your own head, like at the questions I was asking? Because I was asking some pretty serious questions.
Yeah, and there were questions that I couldn't answer. Right. So
no one can.
So we met with our pastor of the church that we were going to, and hoped that he would have some good information for us.
Yeah. That meeting did make me feel better for like a week or two. Did it make you feel any better? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because he's a very good communicator, and he's articulate.
Mm-hmm. He's smart.
Very. But I think also in the way that he communicates apologetics, it's a little bit manipulative. And so he kind of like skirted around the questions I had and just recommended a couple of books. He even gave me a book, which...
Don't we still have it?
Yeah, we do. I almost sold it, and then I decided at the last minute to cancel the order and just kept it.
The Bible Jesus read?
Yeah, it's called The Bible Jesus Read. And it's basically just like this dude's opinion on the Old Testament. Like he basically just reads through the Old Testament and finds the difficult parts to understand, like, how good God could do this. And then he gives his take on it. So it's really like not even great, but, but he gave us that book, and then he recommended another one, which was just kind of shitty because it was just like a bunch of poems. So I was like, I'm not going to read this.
Do you remember what he said to you that had an impact on you towards the end? He said something. I don't remember what it was, but...
Yes, I was starting to cry, and I told him that if God isn't who he says he is, then I don't have anything to live for. And those were my exact words. He responded to me and said, it sounds like you're not as far from God as you think you are.
Yeah.
And to me, that just, that struck me right in my heart. Like, oh, wow. Maybe the reason that I'm going through all of this and struggling so hard is because I desire God so much that I want to understand him.
Right. And because you don't, then it hurts and it feels like you're getting distant.
Right. Like the way I described it to him is that I felt like I was in a desert and that I was so thirsty, but God was just ignoring me or something. And when he said that, maybe God is closer to me than I think, it made me think, oh, maybe this is just like a test. Maybe God is just testing me to see if I will stay faithful through the desert, through the dry spot or whatever. So that was kind of crazy. And now here I am telling my story. Get back to your story.
I was going to say, we'll have to touch on that again.
Yeah, we'll dig deeper into that. But when you walked away from that meeting with him, like what was going through your head? What were you thinking?
I walked away with it feeling like he helped me solidify my faith and like kind of squash the questions. But mainly, I think I felt better because you felt better coming out of it. Yeah. Like seeing you feeling better about where you stood on things made me feel better knowing that you weren't struggling as much. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, my questions were kind of the ones that we were both struggling with. Right. So, makes sense that the lack of my struggles would help you. Yeah. But it was more of seeing your state as opposed to like now that your questions were answered or at least satisfied for now. Then mine were too. It was more like not seeing you struggle as much made me feel better. Like the improvement of my mood and stuff like that. Yeah. I gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that was an interesting time for both of us. I think that was only like a year before. I think it was even less than a year. Really? Yeah, because I think it was that summer. So yeah, that would have been like 6 or 7 months beforehand. Right. Before I became an atheist, you mean? Yeah. Well, before we started like taking the journey. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. and to think that I felt so good after that meeting. Like I even saw our pastor like a couple weeks later and he's like, hey, how are you doing? I was like, I am doing so much better. Yeah. Thank you so much. Like I feel like so much more clarity and, I'm just like waiting out this dry spot and waiting for God to, reveal like what he's teaching me through this. Right. Turns out it didn't actually turn out right. And I don't know, like Christians who are listening to this probably think, oh, well, I didn't wait out I didn't wait through the desert. I didn't wait through the trial. Yeah. And I considered that too. Like when I was going through my research and stuff, I'm like, okay, am I just like giving in to this trial that God has for me? But it really wasn't about that. Like was it for you? No. It was more like now that I'm actually looking at the information, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Right. And I think the dry spot or like the desert we were in was more like we were coming to terms with the fact that we couldn't believe these things anymore. Right. And some of those questions were kind of a big interference. Like you couldn't reconcile the two. Right. Brought us cognitive dissonance. Yeah. Yeah, cognitive dissonance. That's one of those things that I learned in psychology about
And when I was going through all this stuff and like grappling with like my faith versus the facts, that was something that stood out to me, is that this is cognitive dissonance. This is what I'm experiencing, cognitive dissonance. And so I looked through the Thinking Atheist episodes and I saw one called Cognitive Dissonance. It was not what I was expecting.
All right. So for any of our listeners who don't know, the term cognitive dissonance is when you have two opposing thoughts or ideas in your head that just don't make sense. It causes dissonance in your thoughts.
Or discomfort.
Right.
Yeah, it's like an uncomfortable feeling, like when you have one set of beliefs that contradict what you find to be the facts, and you have to like kind of like make sense of both of them in your head, and it makes you uncomfortable. That's cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
On the other hand, there's also a podcast called Cognitive Dissonance.
Yeah, and they're a little bit, edgy. They make a lot of, well, let's just say that they make their living on dick jokes. And it's freaking amazing. They're hilarious, and they're one of like the most popular atheist podcasts out there. But oh my God, like be prepared if you haven't listened to them before and you're starting to. If you do not like offensive language, please stay away. If you like dark humor, you will love it. Yeah. I think probably most of you who are listening to this have heard cognitive dissonance, or at least know what they are, but oh my gosh. So I started listening to the Thinking Atheist called Cognitive Dissonance, thinking, oh, they're going to talk about this, experience I'm having. No, he was interviewing the guys from Cognitive Dissonance. Tom and Cecil. Yeah. And I immediately fell in love. I was just like, oh my gosh, this needs to be a part of my life. So that's when I got into cognitive dissonance. So my first podcast ever ever, not just in the atheist movement, was Thinking Atheist. And then my second one was Cognitive Dissonance, like the total opposite end of the spectrum. Right. But it was so perfect because I had one end, which was like diplomatic, understanding, like, going through the experience of losing my faith. And then the other end was just like complete and utter mockery and just like exaggerated laughing and kind of helped cope with the loss of religion. Yeah, it was just a chance to laugh at it instead of cry. Okay, so we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves here. So you were a Christian up until you met me, and then we were Christians together for about 6 years. Yeah. Ish. So around the time that you met me, you weren't going to church or anything. How were you doing with your faith then?
I mean, I was still a believer. I was in college at the time, away from home. It was out of state. And I had gone to a couple different churches.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Pittsburgh. Went to college at Kent State, which is Northeast Ohio.
Which is like 15 minutes from where I lived, and actually the college where I was attending to.
Right. So I had attended a couple churches, visiting stuff that was close to campus, but nothing was ever as good as what I was going to back home. So I never felt comfortable. I never met church-going friends at college. So I just never got plugged in, but I was still a believer. And anytime I went home to visit, I would go to church. I was still involved there, and I still believed all the things. I just, didn't attend church.
Do you feel like not attending church affected your faith at all?
Somewhat. I don't think it took a heavy toll on my faith. I mean, of course it does, because you're not getting
brainwashed.
You're not getting fed that information every week,
Yeah. Yeah, at the time, like when I would go a couple of weeks without going to church, like I just felt like I wasn't being refreshed.
Yeah.
And now I look back at it and I realize like I had too much time to actually think critically about the world, and I needed to go back and have like my brain stuffed with that stuff again.
Right. So that was early college years. I didn't meet you until my senior year of college. Mm-hmm. And when I found out that you were a Christian, I thought that was awesome.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, perfect.
Yeah, you asked me about that missions trip.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how we started talking. Jenica was supposed to be going on a missions trip to Ukraine, right?
Yeah. Which I didn't end up going on.
Right. So when she asked if I went to church, I said no. And that was a red flag for you, right?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But you immediately followed it up with the fact that you go to church when you go back home and you just haven't found one that you like around here.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, good. He's a picky Christian because I need one of those.
Yeah. So once I found out that you went to church, you invited me to your church, which at the time it was the smaller church.
You mean the cult?
Yeah. So I went and visited a couple times there, and it was a little bit of a culture shock because my church growing up was very conservative. You know, we didn't express the fruits of the Spirit there. It wasn't very charismatic. Yeah,
the fruits of the Spirit would be like praying in tongues,
right?
Being slain in the Spirit.
Was healing one of them?
Healing. Oh, what else? Joy. I don't know.
Yeah. So our church was pretty mainstream.
It was kind of intense and like dancing, worship and stuff. I remember
the first time there. All right. So what I was used to was we do some worship music for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or so.
And you just sing.
Yes. Just sing. There's no dancing. There's no, I mean, there was the occasional arms up in the air, but nothing major. And then there was like a half-hour sermon, and then maybe, one or two songs at the end. This church that Jenica was going to, it was about half an hour of singing with...
More like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With people, dancing and, arms up in the air a lot more.
Yeah, and some people kind of like doing their own form of sign language.
Yeah.
During the worship songs, like interpretive dance, like right there where they're standing.
Yeah. So then after that, they took a break. I'm like, is church over?
Like a 15-minute break. They release the kids and then they kind of like fellowship for a little bit, and then we come back for the sermon.
Which turns out was about an hour long.
At least.
Yeah. So I'm used to like half an hour long. A total of an hour at church with music and sermon. Your church was half-hour music, hour sermon.
Yeah, it was at least 2 hours long.
Yeah.
The whole service combined. So and then afterwards you would stick around for more fellowship.
Yeah, so that was kind of a shock with the length. I'm like, is this ever going to end?
It's like an all-day event.
Yeah. So not only that, but after the break, when everyone came back, the pastor would say, all right, looks like we have some visitors today. If you would go ahead and stand up and, say hi to everybody. All right, that was super awkward.
Right?
Like, oh, hey, everybody check out the new guy.
Yeah, everybody's turn around in your seats, stare at the new people. Let's make them feel nice and welcome. Yeah, that makes you feel nice and welcome.
Right.
It was so awkward. I always felt so bad for all the visitors. Like, why are they doing this?
Yeah.
And then so you had to stand up and everyone's like looking like, oh, who's Jenica here with?
Right. All right. So we went there a handful of times.
Yeah, we went there several times.
Yeah.
But I was starting to realize how whacked out it was.
Yeah. But then...
Sorry.
Let's try this again.
Shut up.
But then we decided to try out the church that your parents were going to.
Yeah.
which was a lot more like the church that I was going to.
Yeah, it was a lot more chill. It was bigger, and it was more like, how do you describe? Well, I always thought of it as being like the doctor lawyer church, where everyone was just kind of like...
Well, it was in the rich neighborhood, so... Yeah.
Everyone was just like real, chill, and they were just doing it for social reasons. And, they would sing during worship sometimes, but they weren't real expressive. And like for me, church was a place where you worshiped God and you like went all out and were expressive and, showed your adoration for God openly. And to be at a doctor lawyer church where everyone's just like hoity-toity, I wasn't really into that. But then when you came along and I was realizing, okay, this church we're going to here isn't really working for him. And I was already starting to feel like kind of disillusioned by it too, because it was kind of like, I don't know, just kind of weird. And I don't know. There were a lot of things that I just kind of had a problem with. And when I call it a cult, like it wasn't like necessarily exactly like a cult that you would, see a documentary about. It was more like just, everyone kind of did the same things as the other families in the church.
Well, they all lived in church.
They all lived in the same area. They all knew each other. They were all up in each other's business.
Yeah. It was traditions.
It was a very charismatic church, like we mentioned. So like, I call it cultish because there were some aspects of that, but I don't know. It's actually very typical of a lot of like small churches in our country, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, we started going to my parents' church instead of my church. And it actually strengthened our faith for a while, I think. Yeah,
I agree.
We really, got plugged in and really into that church a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot more enjoyable. The music was better. The teaching was better.
Yeah, the music was fantastic compared to the other church. Yeah. It was some of that music. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like some of the worship songs that like really get you emotionally charged. They were so good at that.
What's the big worship band?
Hillsong United.
Yes, Hillsong. There was a lot of Hillsong. Chris Tomlin.
Matt. What's Matt?
Redman?
Yes, Matt Redman. Yeah. Yeah, some of those who they're just really good at like emotionally charged worship songs. Yeah. And then the preaching, our pastor was incredibly intelligent. He was, well educated. He knew apologetics, and so he knew how to like persuade you. And he was a really great speaker and communicator. So he was quite convincing in the things that he said. And since we were already biased towards believing, it was very convincing. And I even started inviting one of my atheist friends. And after about 6 months of him coming to church with us and going to lunch afterwards with my family, like we would have people over every Sunday with my family for lunch. And he was coming over and we were talking about, Christianity and apologetics and all this stuff. And he eventually became a Christian, actually.
Yeah.
Which is one of my regrets. But yeah, it wasn't really my choice. It was his choice. So I can't really take full credit for that.
We even got plugged into a small group Bible study where we would meet up at somebody's house and we went through, a different book and we would talk about it.
Yeah. We were doing that for several months.
Yeah. And that was actually like right before all this happened.
Yeah. That was like leading right up to it.
Right. And I was teaching in the kids' room. Mm-hmm. So we were pretty plugged into this church.
Yeah.
Like we we weren't just floating along and, doing our thing. We were invested.
Yeah. And I had started going to those Wednesday morning Bible studies with all the women.
Yeah.
Where I could bring the kids and, go have Bible study with all those women. They would work through the Bible like once a year or something. And so I think we were in Deuteronomy at the time, which was quite a place to be.
I think that probably helped set things in motion too, right?
Yeah, like we were going through some passages about slavery. And I'm just reading these like as my homework, because we're supposed to read our homework and then come back and discuss it in our little group. And all the women there were just like myopically just, making excuses or talking about how it was so progressive for the time, the way that slavery was thought of. And I'm just thinking, God, we're talking about God, right? We're talking about the all-powerful being who made all kinds of crazy ass rules that made zero sense, but he didn't think to get rid of slavery. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I was at home listening to Bart Ehrman and Christopher Hitchens and starting to really ask the big questions. And then I had to go to this Bible study and just sit there quietly and not address these. I think I did ask a few questions that they were pretty uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
I don't remember them specifically, but I do remember that I was a bit of a troublemaker.
Yeah. We'll have to go into more detail with that.
Yeah. During my story.
Yeah. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I can dig up my old journal and find some of those notes.
Yeah. Oh, that would be a good idea.
Yeah. I have a ton of journals.
Yeah.
I was thinking we could do a whole episode, digging up some old journal entries.
It might even be more than one episode.
Probably.
I bet it would be.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, you know what? Another thing I just remembered with that church, that's the church that we got married at. And to get married at the church, you had to go through a pre-marriage counseling session.
Not just one session.
Well,
like a whole series of sessions. Mm-hmm.
But it was with, they would set you up with an older couple or a more experienced married couple.
In the church, yeah.
Yeah. Who could mentor, younger couples.
Yeah, and they would take you through a specific book about pre-marriage.
Yeah. Different chapters, different aspects about relationship and marriage.
Yeah, here's a question for you. Do you think that was beneficial? Looking back from this different perspective we have now, do you think that it was beneficial to have those sessions with them, even though it was skewed towards the Christian perspective?
I think so. There was still some good information in there. I mean, it wasn't all about religion. There were good tips in there about how to deal with conflict, how to deal with your money. I mean, obviously everything had a religious, slant to it, but it got us talking about a lot of different topics, which I think helps. Communication helps. I
think so too.
Go ahead.
I think that just being able to talk about that stuff and actually think about it was beneficial.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, the couple that we had, they were pretty awesome.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were fantastic and very encouraging and understanding. I mean, they had their flaws. There are certain things that I look back on and I think that, it could have been done better or whatever. But I mean, that's going to be every situation. But they were really a very good couple to mentor us at that time. And especially in the, state of mind we were in as Christians, they were very good Christian mentors. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely very, very skewed.
Should we continue on into my deconversion?
Well, do we really want to
move on?
Should we get into deconversion at this point? Are we telling the whole story?
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
because we're going to do our deconversion at a later date.
Yeah. So these episodes are going to be our backstories. We're going to do my backstory, which is what we just talked about.
Yeah, the whole Christian backstory.
Next episode will be Jenica's backstory. And then after that, we'll talk about our journey together. Because all of this leads up to that.
Yeah.
So we'll wait on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the one last thing that I wanted to ask you about, I'm curious about this. What beliefs did you have then as a Christian that you are ashamed of now?
I think the biggest one for me was homosexuality and being judgmental towards them. And even when I was a Christian, like, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't necessarily dislike people because of it. It was the whole love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't agree with it, but that was one of the things that kind of gave me cognitive dissonance. Yeah. It was like knowing that it wasn't right, but not hating them. So now that I have freedom with that, like, it's okay to have different sexual orientations.
Yeah.
So I think that was the biggest thing for me. And in general, just being less judgmental about people.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens.
Yeah.
It just kind of naturally happened.
Yeah, it's weird because they teach you to be loving of everybody. Mm-hmm. But then you have...
And to not judge.
Right. But then you have all that sin.
You have all the reasons to judge. Like, right. It says, do not judge, only God can judge. And then it gives you all of the reasons to judge. And like all of these things that are considered like really sinful.
Yeah. And Jesus even gave, plenty of examples. Like he yelled at the Pharisees. He, flipped tables. He told the people, those without sin cast the first stone. Like, Christians should be taking those lessons, but there's other parts of the Bible that teach you that judgment is okay.
Not necessarily even that judgment is okay, but just it gives you all of these things that are considered sinful, and then you look around at your fellow human beings and you see all of these sins in them. Like, it's one thing, like, I can say, oh, well, I'm not gay, so, I'm good. But then you look out at other people who are gay and you're like, oh, that's so sad. They're living in sin and they don't know like the full grasp of God's love because they're living this life of sin.
Yeah.
So even though like you're trying not to like necessarily judge them for it, you still are feeling like sorry for them.
Right. And there were even Christian gay people, like they would go to church and stuff.
Yeah, like one of our friends that we worked with, he told me that he's a Christian and he believes in God and believes in salvation and all that, but he just can't help that he is who he is and he's gay and there's nothing he can do about that. And like that conversation with him really messed me up because I'm thinking, here is this like Christian man who wants to be like close to God. He wants to be a good Christian and he can't because, this is just who he is and he can't deny who he is. And so, that was one of those things that kind of led me down the path of doubting, like, okay, God, you made us how we are. Why would you make someone wrong?
Yeah. Like purposely wrong.
Yeah. Why would you create someone who can't help it that they are something that you're not okay with? But then it got me thinking,
that's the debate too.
We all are made that way. We're all made wrong. According to Christianity, we're all born with this sinful nature that we can do nothing about.
Yeah, but it's all a choice.
No. Well, I mean, yeah, according to them.
Yeah, that's my point.
But according to Christianity, everyone chooses sin. So is it really a choice? No. I can't choose not to sin.
Yeah.
It's bullshit.
We were doomed.
Yeah, doomed from the start.
Because of Eve.
Yeah. So was there anything that you wanted to add to your Christian upbringing, your backstory?
Not to my upbringing, but to what we were just talking about, is it really puts it into perspective when you know somebody who is different, who is not, the typical Christian, like someone who's gay and may still be a believer, someone who's gay and is not a believer, an atheist in general. And Jenica will touch more on that in her backstory, but when you know somebody who is not a Christian or not heterosexual, it kind of puts pressure on you. And, like I've said before, cognitive dissonance, it brings that into play where you see these people and know that they're good people, but you're taught that they're bad or they're wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a difficult thing to kind of deal with at points.
Yeah. You have to grapple with the contradicting facts.
Yeah.
Are there any other beliefs besides the whole homosexuality thing that you look back on and you're ashamed of?
Not necessarily that I'm ashamed of, but something that still confuses me in the Christian worldview is divorce. Like they teach you that divorce is wrong. Like it's
no
not
matter
okay.
what.
Yeah. Well, unless you have a quarrelsome wife.
No, unless they're cheating on you.
Yeah.
Then you can divorce them if they're cheating on you. But if you have a quarrelsome wife, then you should just live on the corner of your roof.
Right. It's better to do that than to divorce. Right.
Well, it's better to do that than to live with a quarrelsome wife, according to the verse.
But
we'll find that verse for you and put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So, they teach you that divorce is wrong, but I've known and seen so many Christians who have divorced and remarried, yet homosexuality is wrong, and they can't deal with that. So that's something that's still confusing to me.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I was going to ask you about your views on sex, but I think we're going to save that for a separate podcast.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Yeah. So I think we'll wrap it up for this episode.
Yep. And we still don't have a clever tagline, so
bear with us. Maybe that should be our tagline. Bear with us.
Bear with us. Or what's the Anchorman thing? Stay cool.
Stay classy, San Diego.
Stay classy, San Diego. Stay classy, Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Okay. Stay classy, the world.
Podcast world.
Okay, bye.
Tune in next week or...
No, tune into the next episode.
To find out more.
About me. It's all about me.
It's not how it goes.
Jenica, and all this is for me, for my glory and my praise. Okay, bye.